It began in the quiet suburban town of Elmridge, a place where families barbecued on weekends and children played until the streetlights came on. People knew their neighbors by name, and the police were more familiar with parking violations than violent crime. It was the kind of town where bad things weren't supposed to happen. But everything changed on a sunny Friday in early March when 28-year-old Haley Monroe vanished without a trace. Haley was the kind of person people remembered. She had a bright smile, a soft voice, and a natural kindness that made everyone feel at ease. She worked as a graphic designer at a local advertising agency and lived alone in a modest but cozy apartment on Rose Hill Avenue. Her routine was predictable. She woke up early, went for a run, grabbed a latte at the corner cafe, and headed to work. After hours, she often visited her mom or caught up on true crime shows with her best friend, Mia. Her life was uneventful, but in a good way. That Friday, Haley left work at 2:30 p.m., telling her boss she had a personal appointment. It wasn't unusual for her to leave early, especially on slower days, and no one thought much of it. At 3:15 p.m., she was seen at Bean Bar Cafe, sitting outside with a man in a gray hoodie. The barista remembered her because Haley had spilled a little coffee and laughed about it. She seemed relaxed, not afraid or upset. Nothing about her behavior raised any concern. The next day, when Haley didn't return calls from her mother and ignored messages from friends, people assumed she was just having a quiet weekend. But by Sunday night, concern turned into worry. Mia drove to her apartment and knocked several times. When no one answered, she called the building supervisor, who agreed to open the door. Everything inside was neat. Haley's shoes were lined. Up by the door, her phone was charging on the counter. Her purse was on the sofa, keys still inside. There was no sign of forced entry, no blood, no struggle. It was as if she had stepped out for a moment and never returned. By Monday morning, her disappearance was official. The Elmridge Police Department launched a missing persons investigation. Flyers went up around town. Social media was flooded with posts pleading for information. Volunteers formed search parties and scoured wooded areas, parks, and nearby hiking trails. Police brought in K9 units and drones. They questioned everyone: co-workers, friends, neighbors, ex-boyfriends, but nothing pointed to where she might have gone. Detectives reviewed hours of surveillance, footage from traffic cameras and nearby businesses. The last confirmed sighting was at 3:17 p.m., when she was seen walking away from the cafe with the man in the hoodie. But the footage was grainy and his face was obscured. He wore dark sunglasses and a hat pulled low. The man led her toward a black pickup truck parked a block away. The camera caught them opening the doors and stepping in, but it didn't capture the license plate. That was the last anyone saw of Haley Monroe. The truck became the investigation's central focus. Detectives issued a public appeal for information about it, describing the make and model based on the footage. Dozens of leads came in, but none led anywhere. A few trucks matched, but their owners had airtight alibis. Days turned into weeks. Hope began to fade. Haley's family was devastated. Her mother appeared on local news stations, begging for her daughter's safe return. Mia kept organizing searches, even when the police had scaled back their involvement. Everyone in Elmridge was talking about the case. People started locking their doors. Parents stopped letting their children walk home alone. Fear crept into a town that had once felt safe. Then, 3 weeks after her disappearance, Police got a hit from a traffic cam in a nearby town. The black pickup truck had been caught on camera shortly after Haley went missing. Investigators traced the vehicle to Ryan Dorsey, a 45-year-old science teacher at Elmridge High. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, and was known by students and parents as patient, respectful, and a little dull. He lived alone on Maple Drive in a 2-story house with a well-maintained yard and a modest garden in the back. When officers showed up at his door, Ryan was calm and cooperative. He admitted to knowing Haley barely. He said they had met through a tutoring request from a friend and had met for coffee to talk about scheduling lessons. He insisted the meeting was strictly professional. As for the rest of the day, Ryan had a detailed alibi. He went grocery shopping at 6 p.m., picked up dinner at 7, and streamed a movie from 8 to 10. Receipts, security camera footage, and his internet history all backed him up. Still, the police searched his home. Ryan agreed without hesitation. They combed through his truck, his closets, his garage, and even the backyard. Everything was spotless. His lawn was freshly mowed. There were no signs of a struggle, no trace of Haley. A forensics team used luminol and UV lights but found nothing. Soil in the backyard was undisturbed. Not a single red flag. He even passed a polygraph test, further convincing investigators that he had nothing to hide. There was no warrant to detain him. They had no physical evidence connecting him to the crime. He was removed from the top of the suspect list. The case slowly went cold. Media attention faded. Volunteers returned to their normal lives. Haley's photo remained pinned to bulletin boards. Her name still whispered in town, but the hope of finding her alive dimmed with each passing day. Then, in mid-April, a heavy storm rolled through Elmridge. It poured for hours, flooding storm drains and washing out gardens. Tree limbs fell. Fences cracked. Backyard furniture toppled over. The morning after the storm, Ryan Dorsey's elderly neighbor called the police. She had seen something in his backyard, something unusual sticking out of the muddy ground near his shed. Officers returned to the house. They had already searched. But this time, the ground looked different. It had shifted. Something was half buried in the earth, partially uncovered by the rain. The plastic wrapping was visible under a thin layer of mud. A body. The storm had unearthed what Ryan thought would never be found. The discovery of the body sent shockwaves through Elmridge. The entire town, still grieving the disappearance of Haley Monroe, was now forced to face the devastating truth. It was her. The body found in Ryan Dorsey's backyard was identified within hours through dental records. Haley Monroe had been buried in a shallow grave, wrapped in plastic sheeting, and partially decomposed due to the rainfall and warm spring temperatures. Police officers and forensic teams immediately sealed off the property. Yellow tape surrounded Ryan's house. Media vans lined the streets, and neighbors gathered on sidewalks, whispering in disbelief. The quiet science teacher who lived alone, who had passed a lie detector test, who had seemed so cooperative, now he was at the center of a homicide investigation. Ryan was arrested that same day. He didn't resist. He didn't say a word as handcuffs clicked around his wrists and officers led him into the patrol car. His face, once calm and measured, was now expressionless, pale, almost hollow. For investigators, this development changed everything. They had spent weeks chasing dead ends while the answer had been in plain sight the entire time. Ryan Dorsey had played the role of the helpful citizen so convincingly that even seasoned detectives had begun to believe him. His alibi had seemed flawless. But now, everything needed to be re-examined. Detectives began to piece together the timeline again, this time with a more critical lens. They returned to the grocery store where Ryan claimed to be at 6 p.m. on the day Haley disappeared. Security footage did indeed show him entering and leaving, and receipts matched. But what stood out now was that the footage was slightly blurry, low quality, possibly recorded days earlier. Investigators questioned whether the timestamp could have been manipulated. A closer analysis of the footage revealed something else. The outfit Ryan wore that evening matched one he had been seen wearing a week prior in a different video. It raised questions. Could the footage have been reused or looped? Had Ryan orchestrated a digital alibi to cover his tracks? They then turned to his internet history. Ryan had claimed he was streaming a movie from 8 o'clock to 10 p.m. the night Haley vanished. His router logs supported this. But a forensic IT team was brought in to dig deeper. They found that Ryan had installed custom firmware on his home router, capable of simulating data activity even when no devices were connected. Essentially, the router had been programmed to mimic streaming behavior on command, even if the television was off. It was a sophisticated move, far beyond what the average person would understand. Investigators realized they weren't dealing with someone who had acted on impulse. This was premeditated, planned, covered in layers of deception. As police dug into Ryan's past, they discovered more disturbing details. He had no criminal record, but he had a history of isolation. Colleagues described him as polite but distant. Former students remembered him as strict but fair. He rarely socialized, he didn't date, he kept to himself. There were no close friends, no significant relationships, no hobbies outside of work. His digital footprint, however, told a different story. On one of his old laptops, detectives found a hidden folder, protected with layers of encryption. Once unlocked, it revealed dozens of photos, screenshots, and message logs. They were all of Haley. It turned out that Ryan had been watching her for months. He had followed her social media accounts, saved her photos, noted her routines. Through an anonymous profile, he had messaged her weeks before her disappearance, posing as a different man, a local photographer named Mark. Using stolen images and a believable backstory, he built trust with her. He praised her artistic eye, complimented her style, and suggested a casual outdoor photo shoot. Haley, thinking she was working with a creative professional, agreed. On the day she disappeared, she had gone to meet Mark. The cafe meeting that seemed innocent now had a chilling undertone. It was the last step in a carefully constructed trap. From the cafe, Ryan drove her in his truck to his house. What happened next remained unclear, but the autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the head and the presence of sedatives in her system. Police believe she was drugged shortly after arriving, then killed. The exact motive remained elusive. Whether it was obsession, rejection, or a desire for control, Ryan had never expressed any outward signs of danger. He had hidden his intentions behind a mask of normalcy. Neighbors were horrified. One woman who lived across the street said she'd seen Ryan gardening days after Haley's disappearance, calmly watering plants just feet from where her body was buried. Another neighbor recalled that Ryan had been unusually quiet the week after Haley went missing, keeping his curtains drawn and lights off at odd hours. None of them suspected anything. No one had heard screams. No one saw anything unusual. The realization that a body had been in their midst for nearly a month shook the entire community. Prosecutors now had a body, a suspect, and evidence of premeditation. But to build a strong case, they needed more. The investigation turned to Ryan's digital manipulation. The IT expert who had helped Ryan install the router firmware was tracked down. The man claimed he had no idea what it would be used for. He said Ryan paid him to install the software for privacy reasons, and nothing seemed off at the time. Still, the man's testimony was vital in proving Ryan had engineered a fake alibi. Inside the house, forensic teams found tiny traces of blood behind a washing machine and a single blonde hair in the trunk of Ryan's car. Though the house had been cleaned meticulously, microscopic evidence still lingered. The blood matched Haley's. The hair belonged to her. Combined with the digital evidence and the discovery of the body, the case against Ryan Dorsey was growing. Stronger every hour, he remained silent during interrogations. His attorney advised him not to speak, and he complied. But his silence spoke volumes. The man who had once seemed so cooperative now refused to answer a single question. His bond was denied. The community watched as this once unremarkable teacher was revealed to be someone far more sinister than anyone had ever imagined. As the story unfolded in the media, the narrative of a man with a flawless alibi slowly unraveled. He had planned every detail, constructed an illusion of innocence, and nearly got away with it. But nature, unexpected, uncontrollable, and indifferent to human schemes, had undone it all. The rain, something so ordinary, had exposed the truth. And now, Ryan Dorsey's carefully built world was collapsing. One lie at a time. Ryan Dorsey's arrest stunned everyone in Elmridge. Just a few weeks earlier, he had been a trusted teacher, blending into the rhythm of daily life. Now he was accused of burying a woman in his own backyard. As the crime scene investigators worked methodically around his home, the media descended on the neighborhood. Satellite trucks lined the streets. Headlines spread like wildfire. Local teacher linked to shocking backyard discovery. Residents watched in disbelief as evidence bags were carried out and investigators marked the muddy ground where Haley Monroe had been hidden for nearly a month. The police moved quickly to reconstruct the case. They no longer had to guess if a crime had occurred. The discovery of Haley's body confirmed the worst. But now they needed to prove how it had happened and how Ryan had pulled it off without suspicion. The fact that he had passed a polygraph, appeared calm during interviews, and offered full cooperation only deepened the mystery. Investigators were no longer looking at a simple crime of passion. They were dealing with something far more methodical and disturbing. Detectives began reanalyzing every piece of Ryan's previously accepted alibi. At first, everything had appeared to check out. He had gone grocery shopping, picked up takeout, and then spent the rest of the night at home watching a movie. All of it had been verified through receipts, security footage, and digital records. But now, nothing could be taken at face value. Investigators returned to the grocery store security footage. A tech specialist slowed down the video and zoomed in. Something seemed off. The timestamps on the footage were misaligned with the store's internal system logs. The time Ryan appeared on camera was accurate, but the footage itself was older, repurposed from a previous visit. This discovery sent detectives into Ryan's digital world. They obtained a warrant for every electronic device he owned: phones, laptops, routers, even USB drives. What they found painted a picture of a man who had planned not only a murder, but also a meticulous cover-up. His router was installed with modified firmware that generated false internet activity logs. From the outside, it looked like he was home streaming a movie the night Haley vanished. But inside, no devices had actually been active. The entire activity had been programmed to run without him being present. It was a digital smokescreen. Investigators also uncovered traces of secure deletion software used across his devices. Ryan had tried to wipe clean specific folders and browser history, but data recovery specialists managed to salvage fragments. They found deleted photos of Haley pictures clearly taken without her knowledge. One was snapped as she jogged in a park. Another showed her through the window of her apartment building. It became clear that Ryan hadn't just known Haley casually. He had been watching her, studying her, planning something for a long time. The fake online persona Mark was uncovered as well. Through tracing email addresses and phone records, detectives confirmed Ryan had been pretending to be a photographer. Under this identity, he contacted Haley through a local creatives forum. He offered her a free photo session to help build her portfolio. Messages showed Haley being polite, initially hesitant, but eventually agreeing to meet Mark for coffee to talk about the project. That meeting, captured on cafe surveillance, was now understood to be the final step in a trap. Ryan had worn a hoodie, sunglasses, and a hat to obscure his face. He guided her toward the black pickup truck that had eluded identification for weeks. That truck had been scrubbed clean, but investigators still managed to uncover trace evidence. One tiny drop of blood on the inside door panel, and a single blonde hair in the lining of the seat. DNA confirmed both belonged to Haley. It wasn't much, but when added to everything else, it helped complete the puzzle. Police also discovered something chilling in the trunk of Ryan's car. A hidden compartment containing zip ties, a roll of plastic sheeting, gloves, and a vial of sedatives. All of it was concealed under a removable panel. The contents made one thing clear: this wasn't a crime that happened in the heat of the moment. It had been prepared, right down to the materials used to conceal her body. As for the burial site, the location was selected carefully. Behind Ryan's shed, in a section of the yard rarely seen by neighbors, the soil had been slightly disturbed. When police first searched the yard weeks earlier, the ground looked undisturbed because Ryan had laid new sod and strategically placed flower pots to cover the area. No dogs had alerted, and without a warrant to dig, the search had ended at the surface. The recent rainstorm, however, had undone all his careful landscaping. As the mud shifted, the top of the plastic sheeting became exposed, and Haley's body was found wrapped tightly, hands bound, body bruised. Ryan's psychological profile was now a key part of the investigation. Experts analyzed his behavior and background. He was intelligent, socially isolated, and appeared to live a highly controlled life. He had no romantic relationships, no history of violence, and no one who truly knew what went on inside his home. On the surface, he was invisible, but beneath that quiet exterior, there was obsession and calculation. The messages he had sent to Haley under his fake identity suggested he had crafted a fantasy in which she would willingly be part of his life. When that fantasy began to fall apart, when Haley mentioned she was unsure about continuing the project, Ryan may have decided to make her part of his world in a permanent, horrifying way. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Ryan refused to speak. He sat in silence during questioning, His lawyer issued a brief statement denying the charges, but the prosecution was already assembling a mountain of evidence. The state planned to pursue first-degree murder, citing premeditation, digital deception, and the concealment of the body. Ryan was held without bail. Haley's family was left with more questions than answers. Her mother said she had never heard of Ryan before, and Haley had never mentioned him. To her, the tutoring story seemed like a complete fabrication. She believed her daughter had been lured into something she didn't understand until it was too late. The idea that someone could plan every detail so carefully and still be caught by something as simple as rain was haunting. Elmridge changed after that. Trust in quiet neighbors faded. The small-town peace was replaced with suspicion and fear. People locked their doors, watched over their shoulders, and wondered if they truly knew the people living beside them. Ryan. Darcy had gone from an invisible man to the face of evil in their town. And the only reason his secret life had been revealed was because nature had refused to keep it hidden. The backyard had given up its secret, but the deeper investigators dug into Ryan Dorsey's life, the more twisted the truth became. The image of a quiet, intelligent teacher shattered with every new discovery. Beneath the mask of normalcy, there was a carefully maintained system of lies, manipulations, and digital misdirection. The shallow grave was only the beginning. The forensic team began processing every inch of Ryan's house again, this time with new eyes. They used ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging to scan beneath floors and walls. That was when they found something odd in the garage, a temperature anomaly beneath a large wooden shelf. When they moved the unit, they discovered a trap door, painted the same color as the floor and sealed tightly with a hidden latch. Inside was a small, cramped crawl space no bigger than a closet. What was inside chilled the detectives. There were no windows, no light, just a cold, confined area lined with carpet remnants. A single flashlight lay on the floor. There were zip ties, duct tape, latex gloves, and a box of tranquilizers. More chillingly, there was a collection of personal items, hair ties, earrings, and 2 old cell phones that didn't belong to Ryan. At first, police assumed they were Haley's, but they weren't. They belonged to 2 different women who had never been reported missing. When investigators tracked them down, both women confirmed they had met a man online under the name Mark, a supposed photographer, but each had cut off contact when something felt off. They had no idea Ryan had stolen something from them, perhaps. After stalking them or following them in secret, this hidden room revealed the full extent of Ryan's obsession. It was a private world where he planned, watched, and waited. He wasn't acting out of impulse. He had rehearsed every part of his crime. He had run scenarios, tested his alibis, and created entire identities to target specific women. Haley was not the first woman he had manipulated, only the first one he killed. The crawlspace provided a chilling insight into the mind of a man who had spent years crafting a double life. His house was silent, sterile, and clean on the surface, but this room revealed how he had turned control into obsession. The evidence found inside painted a picture of someone who had prepared for abduction and captivity, not just murder. Detectives began to wonder if Haley had been kept alive in that space before being killed. The thought alone pushed investigators to rush the lab work. Autopsy results on Haley's body offered some answers. She had died from blunt force trauma to the back of the head, consistent with being struck by a heavy object. She had also been heavily sedated. Toxicology revealed high levels of a strong tranquilizer not commonly prescribed. There were signs of restraint marks on her wrists and ankles. Time of death was estimated to be within hours of her last sighting, but due to the decomposition caused by the shallow grave and spring rain, exact timing remained unclear. However, there was no evidence she had been alive for days afterward, confirming that whatever Ryan had planned, it had ended quickly. Still, the existence of the crawlspace suggested he had considered keeping her longer. Investigators wondered if something had gone wrong, if she had tried to escape, if his fantasy had collapsed under the weight of reality. Whatever the case, he had wrapped her body in plastic, dragged it across the backyard, and buried it hastily, assuming no one would ever look there. And for weeks, no one did. Now, investigators returned to the digital side of the case. On Ryan's laptop, they found encrypted folders containing extensive planning documents, calendars, checklists, even weather tracking for ideal days to dig. There were notes about Haley's routines, screenshots of her social media posts, and even a map of her jogging route. He had been watching her for months, waiting for the right moment. The fake identity of Mark wasn't created overnight. It was part of a long-term plan. He had used a prepaid phone, fake social media profiles, and multiple VPNs to cover his tracks. The digital forensics team had to unravel layer after layer, and still, they were only scratching the surface. As these findings emerged, prosecutors prepared for trial. The public had already made up their minds, and the court of public opinion had branded Ryan Dorsey a predator, a monster hiding behind a teacher's smile. But the prosecution needed a solid, airtight case. They were building it piece by piece: Haley's DNA in his car, the digital manipulation of his router, the fake online profiles, the crawlspace, and now, a motive built on obsession and control. He had wanted Haley not as a partner, but as a possession. When she didn't play the part he had scripted, he had erased her. Ryan's attorney attempted to challenge the evidence, suggesting that someone else could have framed him or planted the body. But with every passing week, the defense became weaker. The security footage, the cell tower data, the recovery of Haley's items, and the presence of the sedatives, all of it was too connected, too deliberate. The prosecution argued that no one else could have orchestrated such an elaborate deception, especially one that included years of stalking behavior. Then came another unexpected twist. A former student of Ryan's came forward. She told police she had once felt uncomfortable around him. She claimed that during a summer biology workshop, Ryan had given her special attention, offering rides home, lingering after class, making excuses to text her. She had never filed a complaint, afraid no one would believe her, and eventually, he stopped. Investigators could not prove he had done anything criminal, but the pattern was now impossible to ignore. Ryan had shown signs of inappropriate behavior. Long before Haley's case, the town of Elmridge, once tight-knit and peaceful, began to unravel in the aftermath of the revelations. Parents pulled their children out of the school where Ryan had taught. The neighborhood where he lived emptied out. His house, still taped off and surrounded by media, stood as a grim monument to the horror hidden inside. A man who had once blended imperfectly had been exposed as someone who had spent years crafting a fantasy world, only to let it spill into reality with deadly consequences. Haley's family, still reeling from the loss, found a strange sense of relief in the fact that the truth had finally surfaced. But the discovery of the crawlspace, the evidence of long-term planning, and the idea that he might have tried this before made the pain even worse. They had lost her to a man who had orchestrated her disappearance with terrifying precision. And the only reason he had been caught was because of a random act of nature, a heavy rainstorm that had turned up what he tried so hard to bury. As prosecutors built their case, the evidence against Ryan Dorsey continued to deepen. What had first appeared to be a tragic but isolated murder was now unfolding as something far more disturbing, a web of deception, digital trickery, and psychological manipulation years in the making. The crawlspace beneath his garage had already revealed signs of long-term planning. But now, investigators turned their attention to the most confounding part of the entire case: how Ryan had created and maintained such a flawless alibi on the night of Haley Monroe's disappearance. On paper, the timeline was perfect. At 6 p.m., Ryan was supposedly at a grocery store, buying a short list of items: eggs, pasta, and orange juice. The receipt and the video footage matched. At 7 p.m., he picked up dinner from a local Thai restaurant with another receipt to back it up. By 8 p.m., his internet activity showed that he was streaming a 2-hour movie from a popular platform. Every detail lined up. At first glance, it had been enough to clear him until the body was discovered. But with Haley now confirmed dead, and her remains found on his property, the timeline had to be re-examined from the ground up. Detectives called in a team of forensic digital analysts. These experts began pulling raw data from Ryan's devices and router. At first, everything looked ordinary. His modem logs showed download activity that aligned with a 2-hour movie, exactly when he said he watched it. But something subtle stood out. The activity pattern was too consistent, almost robotic. Most people watching a movie would cause the data flow to spike and dip, pausing, rewinding, checking their phone in between. But Ryan's internet usage didn't behave that way. It was flat, steady, and uninterrupted. Analysts determined the activity had been artificially created using custom firmware. The router had been modified to mimic the behavior of a streaming session without actually displaying anything on the screen. It was a script, an automated trick to fool anyone examining his digital footprint. Further analysis revealed Ryan had used remote access software from a different device, likely a burner laptop that had yet to be recovered. He logged into his home network, queued up fake internet traffic, and even sent messages from his own phone number to create the illusion that he was at home. The phone had been left behind, plugged in and undisturbed on his nightstand, while he was likely burying Haley in the backyard, just steps away. Further analysis revealed Ryan had used remote access software from a different device, likely a burner laptop that had yet to be recovered. He logged into his home network, queued up fake internet traffic, and even sent messages from his own phone number to create the illusion that he was at home. The phone had been left behind, plugged in and undisturbed on his nightstand, while he was likely burying Haley in the backyard, just steps away. The grocery store visit was also faked. The footage from that day, at first accepted as genuine, had in fact been replayed from an older clip. Ryan had accessed the store's unsecured internal network weeks prior during a legitimate visit. He copied a feed of himself walking in and used a USB device to overwrite a portion of the store's footage on the day of the murder. By the time police reviewed it, the fake clip looked seamless. The cashier remembered seeing him, but only vaguely. The short transaction and the usual small talk didn't stick in her memory. She had no idea the moment she recalled was actually from a different day. By the time investigators put these pieces together, the illusion of Ryan's innocence had completely crumbled. His alibi had been a carefully executed performance, a timeline built on lies, false signals, and technological sleight of hand. But there was one final piece of the puzzle that changed the tone of the entire case. A set of photos recovered from a deleted cloud account linked to one of Ryan's hidden email addresses. The photos were taken from inside Haley's apartment. Not just outside windows or from a parked car, but inside her home. The angles and lighting made it clear. Some were of her sleeping on the couch, others of her working at her desk. They were grainy, dimly lit, and deeply unsettling. Investigators were horrified. How had he gotten inside without her knowing? Traces of a digital lock-picking device were later found in Ryan's garage. It was a compact tool that, when attached to certain types of electronic door locks, could override access codes. A lock technician confirmed that Haley's apartment model was vulnerable to such a device. This meant Ryan had been entering her apartment without her knowledge, watching her, studying her habits up close. The realization shifted the investigation from a case of calculated murder to one of predatory stalking and invasion that had lasted weeks, if not months. Prosecutors decided to charge Ryan with not just first-degree murder, but also burglary, unlawful surveillance, and criminal impersonation. The charges painted a broader picture. Ryan hadn't simply snapped or committed a random act of violence. He had orchestrated a campaign of control, deception, and domination. And he had nearly succeeded. When court proceedings began, the courtroom was packed. Media outlets from across the country covered the trial. People couldn't understand how someone so ordinary could live such a sinister double life. The prosecution presented their case methodically. They laid out the digital evidence, played excerpts from the faked video footage, and presented the tampered router logs. They walked the jury through the crawlspace photos, the stolen items, the tranquilizers, and the recovered messages from his fake persona. Each piece tightened the noose around Ryan's neck. The defense tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, that someone else could have planted the body, that the digital trail could be manipulated. But the sheer volume of planning, the complexity of the technology, and the personal nature of the stalking left no room for doubt. This wasn't a crime of chance. It was a long-game predation that ended in murder when the fantasy didn't play out the way he wanted. Throughout the trial, Ryan remained stone-faced. He never broke down, never apologized, never explained. He showed no emotion when Haley's family took the stand, describing her dreams, her kindness, the whole left in their lives. He looked straight ahead as they recounted the weeks they spent searching, hoping, praying for her return, unaware her body lay just feet beneath the soil in his backyard. After weeks of testimony, digital recreations, expert witness explanations, and chilling evidence, the jury reached a verdict: guilty on all counts. Ryan Dorsey was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in silent tears and exhaled relief. Justice had been served, but the damage, the horror, would never fully fade. In the aftermath, Elmridge tried to return to normal. But something had changed. A layer of trust had been stripped away. People talked less to neighbors. Teachers were looked at with suspicion. Locks were upgraded. Security cameras installed. Parents walked their kids to school. And all because One man had spent years pretending to be something he was not until the truth, buried in his own backyard, came rising back to the surface. Months after the verdict, the town of Elmridge was still recovering from the emotional wreckage left behind by Ryan Dorsey's crimes. Though the courtroom drama was over, the questions he left behind lingered like a bad dream. How could someone live among others for so long, teaching their children, waving at their neighbors, showing up at the grocery store, all while harboring a hidden, calculated darkness? It was a question that gnawed at the community, and especially at Haley Monroe's family, who struggled to make peace with a loss so senseless, so cruel, and so preventable. In the days following the sentencing, new details emerged from sealed documents and post-trial forensic reviews. A more complete portrait of Ryan's mindset began to form, and what it revealed only deepened the horror. His computer, though largely scrubbed and encrypted, still held fragments of journal entries, scattered, disjointed notes typed into secure documents and never shared. They weren't quite confessions, but rather cold reflections, observations about how people failed to notice patterns, thoughts about control and how it was only real if others didn't know you had it. He wrote about Haley not by name, but as a subject, an object to be studied and shaped. There was no emotion, no regret, no sense of empathy. Just calculation. The crawlspace beneath his garage, once just a disturbing hidden chamber, was now considered a central piece of a longer, undiscovered path of predation. Investigators began quietly re-examining cold cases from surrounding towns. Reports of missing women, break-ins without theft, and cyberstalking incidents that had gone unresolved were pulled out of storage. None of them had ever been linked together, and none had pointed toward Ryan before. But now they were being reconsidered through a different lens. Patterns started to emerge. Similar approaches, similar methods, carefully constructed online. Personas, well-timed disappearances, eerie connections to places Ryan had visited for work or travel. Though no additional bodies were discovered, authorities suspected that Ryan's interest in Haley had come after years of experimentation, learning how to test boundaries, watch unnoticed, manipulate without confrontation. If the storm hadn't come when it did, if nature hadn't uncovered the corner of the plastic in his backyard, he might have done it again. He might have gotten better, smarter, even harder to detect. Haley's family never fully recovered. Her mother, once active and cheerful, stopped attending public gatherings. Her sister withdrew from university and moved in with relatives in another state. They held a memorial service months after the trial, once the media had faded, hoping for some kind of closure. It was small, quiet, attended mostly by those who had truly known Haley. They spoke of her laughter, her drawings, her love of hiking and early morning coffee. They did not mention the court case. They did not say Ryan's name. They focused instead on reclaiming her memory from the nightmare. But for Mia, Haley's best friend, the scars were deeper and more personal. She had spoken with Haley hours before she vanished, texting her jokes and plans for the weekend. She replayed that conversation in her mind constantly, wondering if she had missed a clue, a tone, something that could have warned her. Mia became involved in victim advocacy groups, speaking about the hidden signs of digital stalking and the importance of taking even small discomforts seriously. Her voice became a warning to others. Evil didn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiled, paid its taxes, and waved from across the lawn. Ryan, meanwhile, had been transferred to a maximum security prison out of state. He was kept in isolation after threats from other inmates and attempts at retaliation. He had become a symbol of betrayal in his community, a man who weaponized trust and silence to commit something unthinkable. Inside his cell, he remained as quiet and calculating as ever. He spoke little. He wrote nothing. He answered no questions. He lived, but it seemed, only in a shell of the man he once presented to the world. The final blow came a year later, when a civil lawsuit was filed against the school district by Haley's family. They alleged negligence in overlooking behavioral red flags in Ryan's past, his isolated nature, prior informal complaints from students, and his unexplained use of school technology outside working hours. Internal documents revealed that, while nothing had been formally reported, there had been concerns. Some staff had privately described him as too interested in his students' personal lives, but because he had never crossed an official line, no action had been taken.